A major announcement from Baghdad has captured attention across financial and currency-watching communities. Iraq's central bank has unveiled a new framework for managing the dinar. The move is being discussed widely because it represents a shift from long-standing practices toward a different method of governing exchange rates and settlements. Observers who follow Iraqi monetary policy note that this is not merely a statement of intent, but a concrete policy change, implemented through formal channels. The announcement has prompted immediate analysis because it addresses structural elements of currency management rather than relying on rumors or informal signals. The new approach introduced by the Central Bank of Iraq aims to alter how the dinar is administered, traded, and settled both domestically and internationally. Historically, the dinar operated under a tightly controlled arrangement that limited volatility, but also restricted market responsiveness. The bank's latest framework introduces mechanisms intended to provide more flexibility within a managed structure while maintaining safeguards against wild swings. Officials describe this as a modernization of policy tools that could enable Iraqi authorities to align monetary operations more closely with contemporary international practices. To appreciate the potential significance, it helps to recall how Iraq's exchange arrangements evolved. Since the early post-2003 period, Iraq used a fixed peg to the US dollar to promote stability after a time of extensive disruption. That peg served important stabilization purposes, but it also constrained the currency's capacity to adjust to changing economic fundamentals. Over time, as oil production, trade, and investment patterns changed, many analysts argued the peg no longer reflected the country's economic realities. The central bank's framework appears to be a response to that long-standing tension between stability and adaptability. A central element of the new policy is a managed, hybrid exchange mechanism rather than a single rigid rate. Under this structure, the dinar would be allowed to move within a predefined band or corridor, granting markets some latitude while keeping central bank tools available to dampen excessive volatility. This model has precedence elsewhere. It offers a way to combine market signals with policy interventions. By permitting a degree of movement, the framework aims to improve price discovery and reduce pressure that can build up under a strictly fixed regime. Another pillar of the plan emphasizes backing currency with tangible reserves. The central bank has signaled that reserves, including proceeds tied to oil, holdings of foreign exchange, and possibly gold or other assets, will underpin monetary operations. Reinforcing reserves seeks to strengthen confidence in the domestic currency by tying it to measurable assets and liquidity. That kind of reserve policy is commonly used by central banks to demonstrate capacity for intervention and to provide a buffer against shocks in global markets or sudden changes in capital flows. The framework also highlights integration with global payment and digital banking networks. The central bank's announcement mentions steps to connect Iraqi financial institutions to international clearing systems and to modernize settlement processes for real-time transfers. That technical linkage is intended to facilitate cross-border transactions and align Iraq's banking infrastructure with global operational standards. If these systems are implemented effectively, they would allow Iraqi banks to process international payments more rapidly and transparently, reducing frictions in trade and finance. Timing has been a notable element of the conversation around the announcement. The policy rollout arrives in a period when many countries and financial institutions are upgrading payment technologies and discussing the role of digital platforms in cross-border settlements. Observers have pointed out that global conversations about asset-backed arrangements and greater transparency in currency frameworks make this a moment when merchant and central bank practices are under review worldwide. For Iraq, the new exchange framework is being interpreted as an effort to ensure readiness for a changing international financial environment. Practical preparations inside Iraq have also been reported. Commercial banks and other financial institutions appear to be adjusting internal systems, updating software, and training personnel to work with the new operational requirements. Reports suggest ATMs, payment platforms, and compliance procedures are being reviewed to accommodate a more flexible exchange arrangement and digital settlement processes. These on-the-ground changes indicate that the framework is not only a regulatory announcement, but also a process that requires substantial operational updates across the domestic banking sector. From a policy sequence perspective, the central bank's initiative addresses several foundational steps commonly required before a change in exchange arrangements. Those steps typically include legal and regulatory alignment, demonstrable reserve strength, operational readiness in banking systems, and clear transparency measures. With the launch of the new framework, authorities signal progress on many of these fronts, although public communication of precise technical details remains focused on institutional channels rather than broad consumer-oriented explanations. The implications for ordinary citizens, if the framework leads to a different exchange environment, are framed in general economic terms rather than promises. Changes in exchange systems can influence import prices, purchasing power, and the operating environment for businesses. A system that better reflects market conditions while maintaining stability may alter the economics of trade and wages over time. Policymakers emphasize that any adjustments would be managed with attention to social and economic impacts so as to minimize disruption during transition phases. International cooperation and technical assistance appear to have been part of the preparatory process, according to the public narrative accompanying the central bank's announcement. Engagement with global financial institutions and partnerships to ensure compliance and interoperability with international platforms were referenced as components of the modernization effort. Such collaborations are common when countries update clearing mechanisms or adopt new digital settlement technologies. They are intended to ensure adherence to accepted standards and to build confidence among international counterparties. Budgetary and fiscal actors inside. Iraq are reportedly considering the implications of exchange flexibility for planning purposes. Some government documents and budget forecasts are being examined in light of the new framework, which could mean adjustments in official calculations tied to projected exchange conditions. When a finance ministry factors different exchange assumptions into budgeting, it often reflects an expectation that the monetary authorities are moving toward a different operational posture. Although official fiscal planning remains subject to cabinet and parliamentary processes, analysts watching regional dynamics note that changes in one country's exchange policy can be part of broader shifts across emerging markets. A move toward managed market mechanisms and stronger reserves resonates with debates about how exchange rates should balance domestic priorities and external competitiveness. While each economy has distinct circumstances, the Iraqi framework contributes to ongoing regional and global conversations about currency management, asset backing, and digital payments modernization. It is important to emphasize the distinction between factual policy shifts and market speculation. The central bank's formal framework represents a policy decision and operational program. It does not equate to an instantaneous market revaluation. Transitions in exchange arrangements typically unfold through carefully staged steps, technical tests, regulatory communications, and operational rollouts before any announced market rate changes. Observers point out that having the institutional groundwork in place is a necessary condition for any future adjustments. But it is not the adjustment itself. Communication, clarity, and verification from official sources are critical in such episodes. The most reliable information will come from central bank publications, official government releases, and registered regulatory filings. Because narratives can proliferate rapidly online, authorities and market participants often remind the public and interested parties to rely on verified statements from institutional channels rather than third-party claims or unverified reports. This practice helps reduce misinformation and supports orderly implementation of any complex policy. Looking at the technological aspects, linking banks to international real-time settlement networks requires substantial technical integration, security upgrades, and compliance with anti-money laundering and sanctions screening protocols. These are non-trivial tasks that involve both software changes and procedural reforms. Financial institutions typically undergo phased testing and certification with international partners before full-scale operation, and these steps are intended to minimize operational risk when live transactions begin to flow through interconnected systems. Market observers also note that reserve strengthening and explicit asset backing serve distinct policy aims, improving confidence, managing liquidity, and providing a buffer against unexpected shocks. Central banks communicate reserve levels and composition to demonstrate capacity for intervention should exchange pressures arise. In Iraq's case, the public emphasis on tangible assets as part of the framework is meant to convey that policy decisions are supported by quantifiable resources rather than abstract commitments. Alone, the broader regional and geopolitical context shapes how reforms are received. Iraq's economic policy decisions occur within a landscape that includes neighboring economies, global commodity markets, and international financial institutions. Coordination with external partners on technical standards and compliance can help ensure smoother integration with global markets. But each step also requires careful diplomatic and financial coordination to preserve stability and maintain market access. For those following these developments, the current moment represents a phase of institutional change more than an immediate market outcome. The announcement establishes a new operational baseline for currency management and signals the central bank's intent to modernize policy tools and infrastructure. Observers should continue watching official communications for timelines, technical details, and implementation milestones that clarify how and when each element of the framework will be activated. Finally, this development is framed by officials and analysts as part of a longer-term process to strengthen monetary institutions and align banking operations with international norms. Such processes are incremental and typically involve ongoing monitoring, testing, and adjustments. The announcement of the new framework is an important administrative and policy milestone, indicating that authorities have taken concrete steps toward modernizing exchange arrangements and related banking infrastructure.